A quiet winter road led Everett Harlan past a warm house with something terribly cold waiting outside. Beneath an old maple tree, a German shepherd stood chained in the snow, silent as if hope had learned not to bark. Inside the house, a man's anger shook the walls while a woman watched from behind the glass. Everett thought he was only buying a neglected dog from a cruel owner. But Briar carried more than scars, more than fear, and more than an old collar marked by a North Star. She would teach a retired Navy SEAL that saving someone is not always about fighting harder. Sometimes it is about standing close enough to protect and far enough to let healing choose its own path. If this story touches your heart, tell me where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep writing more stories like this. Snow fell softly over Lake Elowen, not in a rage, not yet, but with the quiet certainty of something ancient returning to claim its season. Everett Harlan walked alone along the narrow road that curved beside the frozen lake, his tool bag hanging from one broad shoulder, the strap biting into the olive-drab combat shirt beneath his forest-green canvas jacket. The sleeves of that shirt, faded camouflage with worn horizontal bands across the biceps, still carried the ghost of a former life. Not a costume, not a boast, just something durable enough to survive salt, oil, weather, and the stubborn habits of a man who had outlived most of his uniforms. Lake Elowen was preparing for its Winter Light Festival. Across the small Vermont town, ladders leaned against porches, yellow bulbs looped from roof lines, and shop windows glowed with painted snowflakes. The diner on the corner steamed from within, its glass fogged by coffee, butter, and the kind of gossip that could warm a man or burn him, depending on where he stood. Out on the lake, the ice reflected the gray sky like polished pewter. Everett had just finished repairing a generator for Mrs. Calloway, who lived 3 houses past the old chapel and insisted every winter that the machine was possessed by a Methodist demon. It had taken him 40 minutes, 2 new plugs, and 1 scraped knuckle to prove the demon was only bad wiring. Now he wanted coffee. Black. Hot enough to scald common sense back into a man. He wanted his stove lit. He wanted the clean silence of his cabin. For 10 years in the Navy, silence had meant danger. Since coming home, Everett had tried to teach his body that silence could also mean peace. The lesson had not taken well. His boots crushed through the powder at the road's edge. He noticed everything without meaning to: tire marks half filled by snow, a bent mailbox, smoke from chimneys, a crow lifting from a pine branch. Old training did not leave a man. It simply changed clothes and followed him into civilian life. Then he heard the chain. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a thin metallic drag beneath the hush of snowfall. Everett stopped. The sound came from the yard of a house set back from the road, a 2-story timber place with warm light in the downstairs windows and neglect in the bones. One gutter sagged. A porch rail leaned outward. The front steps had been shoveled badly, leaving hard ridges of ice along the edges. Beside the yard, under an old maple tree, something dark shifted in the snow. Everett took 3 slow steps closer. A German shepherd stood there, chained short to the trunk. Female from the look of her build. Yellow and black coat, though the gold at her chest and legs was dulled by snow and dirt. Her back carried a black saddle of fur like a storm cloud, laid over sunlight. One ear stood sharp and high, the left had a small nick at the edge, a crescent missing from the dark fur. Around her neck, an old leather collar disappeared beneath a pale mark where the hair had thinned. Her water bowl was frozen solid. The chain had wound itself around a raised root of the maple. Each time she shifted, the links pulled tighter, shortening the distance between her body and the tree. The ground around her paws had been clawed open, brown earth showing through the white like an old wound. She did not bark at Everett. She did not bare her teeth. She only looked at him. That look stopped him more completely than a shout would have. Amber eyes, bright but exhausted, measured him from beneath a dusting of snow. Not pleading, not trusting. Something worse. Something that had learned pleading was expensive and trust was often collected like a debt. Everett's gloved hand tightened around the strap of his tool bag. Inside the house, something slammed. A man's voice rose, thick with drink and anger. Everett turned his head slightly. Another crash followed, not glass, maybe a chair leg striking the floor. Then a woman's voice, low and hurried, trying to keep a storm inside four walls from becoming weather the whole town could see. Everett stood in the snow between the lit house and the chained dog and felt the old machine inside him wake. Assess entry points, count voices, distance to front door, possible weapons in rural home, rifle, shotgun, kitchen knife, tools. He hated how quickly the thoughts came, hated even more how clean they felt. The man inside shouted again. The words were blurred by walls and snow, but the meaning was plain enough. Rage had a language of its own. Everett had heard it in alleys overseas, in barracks after bad news, in men who mistook volume for power because they had misplaced every other kind. The German shepherd shifted. The chain bit shorter. That decided him. Not the voices, not the anger inside. Those belonged to a world of laws, choices, witnesses, and consequences. But the dog was outside, in front of him, caught in a piece of metal that could kill her before morning if the temperature dropped the way the sky promised it would. Everett walked to the porch and knocked. He did not pound. He did not announce himself like a soldier breaching a door. He knocked 3 times, firm enough to be heard, calm enough not to become part of the fight. The shouting stopped. For a moment, the house held its breath. Then heavy footsteps crossed the floor. A lock turned. The door opened just enough to show a man in a stained thermal shirt, work pants, and an old jacket hanging open despite the cold. He was in his early 50s, thick through the shoulders and softening around the middle. His face was red from drink, weather, or both. Rough stubble crawled across his jaw. His eyes, pale and unfocused, narrowed at Everett as though the world had personally insulted him by knocking. What? Everett kept his hands visible. "Dog's chain is wrapped around the tree root," he said. "She keeps moving. It's going to tighten. Temperature drops much more. She won't last out here." The man stared at him, then leaned past the door frame to look toward the maple. "That mutt?" He gave a humorless laugh. "She's fine." Behind him, in the warm yellow blur of the hallway, a woman stood half-hidden near the kitchen entrance. Mid to late 40s, slender, cardigan pulled tight around her body, one hand holding the opposite sleeve like it might keep her stitched together. Her brown hair was tied low, a few strands loose near a pale cheek. She did not look at Everett first. She looked at the dog. Everett noticed that. He noticed too much. "What's her name?" he asked. The man blinked, annoyed by the question. "Briar," the woman said softly. The man turned his head just enough to make her shrink back. "Briar," he repeated, as if the name tasted foolish. "Useless thing, eats like a wolf, looks at you like she's judging your soul." Everett glanced toward the old maple. The dog had lowered her head, but her eyes remained on the porch. "Maybe she is," Everett said before he could stop himself. The man's mouth tightened. For one cold second, the porch became smaller. Everett let silence do the work. He had learned long ago that men looking for a fight often wanted help finding one. He had no intention of offering any. Instead, he adjusted the tool bag on his shoulder and looked back toward Briar. "I've handled shepherds before," he said. "If she's too much trouble, I'll take her off your hands." The man stared. "What, you some kind of rescue saint?" "No." That was true enough. Everett was no saint. Saints probably slept better. "I've got space," he said. "Fenced yard, warm barn. You want rid of her? I'll pay." From inside the house, the woman's fingers tightened around her sleeve. The man's suspicion wrestled with greed across his face. It was not a noble battle, and greed won quickly. "How much?" Everett named a number high enough to tempt him, low enough not to look desperate. The man snorted. "For that thing?" "For my peace and your convenience." That made the man laugh, a short, ugly sound, but laughter all the same. He opened the door wider and stepped onto the porch, bringing with him the sour smell of whiskey, old smoke, and engine grease. "Cash?" Everett reached into his jacket slowly and took out his wallet. The woman moved then. Only a step. The man did not notice because he was watching the bills. Everett did, because noticing was the one prayer his body still said without permission. Her eyes met his. They were light gray blue, tired in a way sleep could not fix. She did not ask him to help her. She did not accuse. She did not perform suffering for a stranger. She only looked at him with the terrible restraint of a person who had learned that even hope must be quiet. The man grabbed the cash and jerked his chin toward the yard. "Fine. Take her. Collar too. I don't want it back." "Paper?" Everett asked. "What?" "Write that you sold her to me." The man scoffed. "You serious?" "Yes." The answer came out flat as a locked gate. For a moment, anger flashed again, but the money was already in the man's hand, and the cold had begun to creep under his open jacket. He cursed under his breath and turned back into the house. "Stay there." The door remained half open. The woman waited until his footsteps moved deeper inside. Then she stepped closer, silent as snowfall. In her hand was a folded scrap of paper. Everett did not reach for it at first. Taking it felt like crossing a line. Not taking it felt worse. She placed it against his palm with fingers so cold they seemed made of the weather outside. "Please," she whispered. That was all. Then she retreated before the man came back. Everett opened his hand just enough to read the uneven words written in blue ink. "Please don't bring her back." He folded the paper once and slid it into his jacket pocket beside his father's old scratch diving watch, the one he had worn through storms at sea and quieter storms since. Something in his chest tightened. Not rage exactly, not yet. Something older and heavier. The knowledge that sometimes a rescue looked very small from the outside. A piece of paper, a bought dog, a woman stepping back before anyone saw her being brave. The man returned with a torn envelope and a pen. He scrawled a crude bill of sale against the porch railing, signed it, and shoved it at Everett. "There? Happy?" Everett took it. "No." The man frowned, unsure whether he had been insulted. Everett walked down from the porch before the moment could curdle. Snow creaked beneath his boots as he approached the maple. Briar watched him come. He stopped a few feet away and crouched, turning his body slightly sideways, not facing her head-on, not looming. The old maple stretched above them, bare branches catching strings of snow like white thread. "Easy," he said. His voice changed without his permission. Lower, softer, less command, more invitation. Briar's nostrils moved. She smelled him. Metal, wool, engine oil, old coffee, the faint smoke of wood stove ash. Maybe she smelled the war in him, too. Dogs often knew what men spent years trying not to say. Everett reached for the chain where it had twisted around the root. Briar stiffened. Her body went still, but her eyes did not leave his face. "I know," he murmured. "I wouldn't trust me either." The chain was cold enough to sting through his glove. He unwound it slowly, link by link, careful not to pull against her collar. When the last loop came free, the length slackened at once. Briar did not move. Everett unclipped the chain from the old leather collar. For the first time since he had seen her, she was no longer attached to the tree. A freed creature should run, some foolish part of him thought. Leap, shake off snow, celebrate the sudden mercy of the world. But Briar only stood there. Snow clung to her black back and golden chest. Her tail hung low. The pale mark around her neck looked almost silver in the fading light. She seemed less like a rescued dog than an old guardian whose kingdom had fallen and who did not yet believe another road existed. Everett straightened. "Come on, Briar." She blinked at the sound of her name in his mouth. He turned toward the road and took a few steps, not tugging, not calling again. Behind him, nothing moved for several seconds. Then came the faint crunch of paws in snow. Everett did not look back immediately. He gave her the dignity of choosing. When he finally turned, Briar was following at a careful distance, head low, amber eyes flicking between him and the house. In the downstairs window, the woman stood with one hand pressed to the glass. Nora Vance, Everett guessed. A name he had heard in town but never had reason to hold. Now he held it. Briar stopped. For a long moment, the dog and the woman looked at each other through falling snow and window light. No sound passed between them. No grand farewell. Only the quiet agony of two beings who had cared for one another as much as their cages allowed. Everett waited. The town lights glowed beyond the road. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang from the chapel tower, marking the hour. Snow softened the edges of everything, the broken porch rail, the old maple, the footprints leading away. At last, Briar turned from the window. She came to Everett's side, not close enough to touch, but close enough to be seen walking with him. Together, the man and the dog moved down the road toward the frozen lake, leaving behind a chain under the maple tree and a woman's hand fading slowly from the glass. Everett had thought he was only bringing home a neglected dog, but as Briar's careful steps matched the rhythm of his own, he felt the first uneasy stirring of a truth he was not ready to name. Some rescues began before anyone knew who was saving whom. Everett's cabin stood on the eastern bend of Lake Elowen, where the road narrowed and the pines leaned close enough to whisper against the roof in winter wind. It was not a grand house. Nothing about Everett Harlan asked to be admired. The cabin had a stone chimney, a wide front porch, and a woodshed stacked with the kind of precision that made neighbors joke he could probably survive a siege by weather, bears, or bad manners. Its windows glowed amber against the snow, and beyond them waited a world that smelled of pine boards, black coffee, gun oil locked away in drawers, and a wood stove that had learned the moods of its owner. Briar stopped at the porch steps. Everett did not pull the leash. He stood 3 steps above her, one hand resting on the doorframe, the other holding the end of the lead lightly enough that she could feel the choice in it. Snow collected on her black saddle of fur. Her amber eyes moved from the door to the windows, then to the darkness behind them, weighing the house as if every wall might suddenly grow teeth. "It's just a door," Everett said. Briar looked at him. He almost heard the answer in her silence. "No door is just a door." Everett lowered his eyes first. That surprised him. In his old life, looking away from a threat was a mistake. But this dog was not a threat. She was a creature standing at the border of warmth, too tired to believe in it. So he stepped inside and left the door open. Cold air rolled into the cabin behind him. The fire in the stove cracked softly, irritated by the draft. Everett set his tool bag on the bench, shrugged out of his canvas jacket, and waited. After a long moment, Briar climbed one step, then another. On the third, her back paw slipped. She froze so completely that Everett felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity. Pity stood above suffering and looked down. This was closer to recognition. A soldier knew the look of a body expecting punishment for a mistake. "You're all right," he said, quieter this time. Briar entered the cabin as if walking into a church after years of exile. Her paws made damp marks on the pine floor. She did not sniff eagerly or wag her tail. She took inventory. Front door, back door, window, stove, hallway. Everett, then the front door again. Everett closed it slowly. The latch clicked. Briar flinched. He pretended not to see, because sometimes Mercy was not making a performance of what another creature could not help. He moved through the cabin with deliberate calm, gathering what he needed: 2 towels from the mudroom, a shallow bowl of lukewarm water, an old wool blanket from the cedar chest. He placed everything on the floor near the stove, then crouched several feet away. The dog stayed standing. Her collar, old brown leather, sat too tightly against the pale worn ring around her neck. Beneath the dirt and snow, she was beautiful in a ruined way. Gold legs, dark muzzle, a black back like a winter shadow, and that small crescent nick in her left ear. Not a decoration, a history. Everett reached for the collar. Briar lowered her head and locked her legs. He stopped. "Right," he murmured. Too soon. He set the towel down instead. For several minutes, the only sounds were the stove, the wind, and the slow drip of melting snow from Briar's fur to the floorboards. Everett had handled dogs before: military working dogs, patrol dogs, stubborn farm shepherds who believed tractors were personal enemies. But those animals had known where they stood in the world. Briar looked like she had been asked to survive too many rules written by angry hands. He phoned Dr. Leland Price before taking off his boots. The old veterinarian arrived 40 minutes later in a dented Subaru that complained its way up the snowy drive. He came in wearing a brown olive vest over a blue-gray flannel shirt, boots dusted white, and a plaid scarf tucked under his chin. His hair was thin and white, his mustache neatly trimmed, and his metal-framed glasses had slid so far down his nose that he seemed to be observing the world over the top of them by choice. "Evening, Everett," he said, as if midnight house calls for half-frozen shepherds were ordinary social visits. "This the young lady?" Briar watched him from the corner beside the stove. Dr. Price did not approach her directly. He set his old leather medical bag on the floor, lowered himself into a chair with the small grunt of a man whose knees had filed complaints years ago, and pulled a biscuit from his vest pocket. He placed it on the floor halfway between himself and the dog. "Well," he said, "I've had warmer receptions from barn cats, but colder ones from town council members." Everett almost smiled. Briar did not take the biscuit. Dr. Price waited anyway. That was the first thing Everett noticed. The old man did not fill the room with urgency. He let time sit down beside him. When Briar finally stepped forward and sniffed the biscuit, Dr. Price did not celebrate. He simply opened his bag. The exam took patience. Too much by Everett's measurement. He was used to injuries being assessed, categorized, treated, and moved past. Dr. Price worked differently. He spoke to Briar in a low, formal voice, calling her "young lady" as he checked her paws, her gums, the thin places beneath her coat. He found cracked nails, raw skin under the collar, mild dehydration, and the bony leanness of an animal that had eaten enough to remain alive, but not enough to be well. When Everett accidentally dropped the metal water bowl near the sink, Briar flattened instantly to the floor. Not ran, not barked. Flattened. Everett stood frozen, the bowl rolling in a slow silver circle until it stopped against the cabinet. Dr. Price looked at him over his glasses. "That," the old vet said gently, "is what worries me more than the weight." Everett said nothing. He had seen men react like that to mortar fire, to slamming doors, to fireworks on summer nights. Seeing it in a dog made the room feel smaller. Dr. Price loosened the collar enough to ease the pressure, but did not remove it entirely. "She's been living with fear as a schedule," he said. "Body gets used to it. Mine does too." "What does she need?" Everett asked. "Food, warmth, rest, routine, but not military routine?" Everett looked at him. Dr. Price closed his bag. "Don't make that face. You know exactly what I mean." "I didn't make a face." "You made an entire paragraph." Briar's ears shifted at the tone of their voices. Everett lowered his volume without being asked. Dr. Price handed him a small packet of instructions. Soft food, warm water, no sudden handling, No loud commands. No crowding her space. "And Everett?" He paused at the door, scarf already dusted with snow from the wind sneaking through the frame. "She doesn't need a commander. She's had enough people deciding where her body belongs. Let her learn this house doesn't take anything from her." Everett did not like the sentence, not because it was wrong, because he suspected it was not only about the dog. After Dr. Price left, Everett followed the instructions with a discipline that would have impressed no one except himself. He warmed the food to the right temperature. He placed fresh water near the stove. He folded the blanket into a square and laid it on a braided rug. He cleared the hallway so there would be no obstacles. He checked the locks twice, then once more because habit was a stubborn priest. Briar ate only after he sat across the room and looked away. She drank 3 cautious laps of water, then retreated to the corner where she could see the front door, the back hallway, the windows, and Everett all at once. The blanket remained untouched. By midnight, Everett had built the safest room he knew how to build. Briar refused every safe place he offered. That irritated him more than he wanted to admit. Not at her. Never at her. At the uselessness of competence. He could repair a generator in freezing rain. He could read a snowbank and tell where the road ended. He could disassemble and clean old weapons blindfolded, though those stayed locked away now. He could plan, secure, reinforce, prepare. But he could not convince one frightened dog to sleep. So he lay on the couch in his thermal shirt and dark wool pants, boots set neatly beside him, and listened to Briar not resting. Every few minutes her nails clicked softly against the floor. She shifted, checked a door, returned to the corner. Once she stood over the untouched blanket, lowered her head as if considering kindness, then backed away from it. Everett stared at the ceiling beams. Outside, the lake groaned under its ice. The sound traveled through the winter night like an old god turning in sleep. Near 2 in the morning, Everett drifted into the thin, treacherous kind of sleep that did not heal a man so much as leave him unguarded. He woke with his right hand clenched around nothing. His breath was wrong. Too fast. The room was dark except for the red pulse of embers inside the stove. For one dislocated second, he was not in Vermont. He was under another sky, in another cold, listening for a sound that had not existed for years, but still knew how to find him. His fingers trembled. He sat up too quickly. The couch creaked. Briar was there, not in the corner, beside him. She stood close enough that her shoulder brushed his knee, but not so close that he felt trapped. Her head was lowered. Her eyes were on his face, alert but not afraid. She did not bark. She did not whine. She pressed the side of her muzzle against his leg with careful weight. Everett went still. The pressure was firm, deliberate. Not comfort by accident. Intervention. He inhaled once. Badly. Briar leaned harder. Something inside him, something braced and rusted, shifted by a fraction. He placed one hand on the couch cushion beside her, not on her body. The tremor in his fingers embarrassed him, though there was no one there to judge it but a dog who had seen worse human failures than shaking hands. "I'm here," he whispered. Briar blinked. It took him a moment to realize he had not said it to her, or not only to her. He breathed again, slower this time. Briar lowered herself onto the floor beside his feet and stayed there until his body remembered the cabin, the stove, the snow, the lake, the present. Only then did Everett understand what Dr. Price had been circling around. Briar had been trained, not for attack, not for intimidation, not for the hard, clean work men often praised in dogs because it resembled war. She had been trained to notice the fracture before the person broke. The next morning, gray light spread over the lake like watered milk. Everett found Briar asleep at last, not on the blanket, not in the corner, but on the floor below the couch, her body curved near his boots. He did not move for a long time. Later, after she ate a little more and allowed him to wipe dried snowmelt from her legs, Everett drove into town with Briar in the back seat of his truck. She stood for half the ride, braced and watchful, then slowly sat when the road smoothed near Main Street. June Mallory's diner was already alive. The bell over the door rang as Everett entered, and heat wrapped around him in a cloud of coffee, cinnamon, fried butter, and conversation. June herself stood behind the counter in a red wine apron, silver curls escaping from a kerchief, cheeks pink from the grill. She was short, round, and somehow gave the impression of occupying more moral space than any person in the room. Her eyes dropped to Briar, then rose to Everett. "Well," she said, wiping her hands on a towel, "either you finally got a roommate, or that dog took pity on you." Everett chose a booth near the wall where Briar could tuck herself beneath the table. She did not relax exactly, but she lay down with her head facing the door. June came over with a mug of black coffee before he asked, "Name?" "Briar." June looked under the table. "Pretty name. Sounds like something that survives fences." Everett warmed his hands around the mug. "She was chained outside Clay Vance's place." June's face changed, not dramatically. June was too old for wasteful expressions, but the humor left her eyes. "Nora's dog," she said quietly. Everett looked up. June did not explain further. Not yet. Instead, she leaned down slightly, keeping respectful distance from Briar. "You hungry, sweetheart? I've got turkey that accidentally falls off plates when men aren't looking." "I'm looking," Everett said. "That has never stopped me before." For the first time since the old maple, something like air moved through Everett's chest without hurting. Briar's ears twitched toward the door. Not the kitchen, not June. The door. Everett followed her gaze. Outside, beyond the fog diner window, people moved along Main Street, hanging festival lights from the eaves. A woman in a pale cardigan passed briefly on the sidewalk, head lowered against the snow. Briar lifted her head. The woman disappeared beyond the window frame. Everett did not need to see her face. Briar's whole body had already spoken the name. Nora. June set the coffee pot down gently. "Some dogs," she said, voice softer than before, "carry more than their own leash." Everett looked at Briar beneath the table, at the way she remained still, though every line of her body leaned toward the door. He had brought her home to warm her, feed her, give her shelter. But as her amber eyes stayed fixed on the street, Everett felt the shape of a harder truth forming at the edge of the morning. Briar was safe now. That did not mean her heart had arrived with her. And maybe, Everett thought, neither had his. By the third morning, Briar had learned the cabin's sounds. She no longer startled at every pop from the wood stove, though her ears still rose like small flags whenever the old pipes knocked in the walls. She had accepted the bowl Everett placed near the kitchen island, but only if he did not stand over her while she ate. She had not yet stepped fully onto the gray wool blanket by the fire. Instead, she slept beside it, as if comfort were a country whose border she could guard but not cross. Everett tried not to make a mission out of that. He failed by breakfast. He adjusted the blanket twice, moved the water bowl 6 inches closer to the stove. Checked the collar Dr. Price had loosened, set the food down, stepped back, watched, looked away, watched again. Briar, with the grave patience of a creature who had survived worse men than fussy ones, ignored the blanket and ate 3 careful mouthfuls. "You're doing that on purpose," Everett muttered. Briar licked a fleck of food from her muzzle and looked at him. It was not accusation. It was not gratitude. It was worse. It was assessment. After breakfast, Everett drove her to Dr. Leland Price's clinic on the south edge of town. The clinic sat behind a row of snow-heavy spruce trees, with a painted wooden sign shaped like a sleeping cat, and a walkway Dr. Price had shoveled badly enough to prove he cared more about animals than liability. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, hay, old leather, and dog biscuits. Dr. Price scanned Briar's microchip while Everett stood by the exam table with his arms crossed, trying not to look like a man awaiting intelligence from enemy territory. The scanner beeped. Dr. Price frowned at the small screen. "Well," he said. Everett had learned to distrust that word in medical places. "Well, what?" "There is a chip." "That's good. But the contact number is disconnected. The registration address is in New Hampshire, and the organization listed here hasn't updated anything in years." "What organization?" Dr. Price turned the scanner so Everett could see the small line of text. "North Star Response Dogs." Everett read it twice. Briar stood between them, calm but alert, her amber eyes following the doctor's hands. "Response dogs?" Everett asked. "Possibly crisis support, trauma response, sometimes trained to assist veterans, survivors, search teams, emergency shelters." Dr. Price scratched gently beneath Briar's jaw. She allowed it for 3 seconds, then turned her head away. The old vet respected the boundary immediately. "Not attack work, not guarding, at least not primarily." Everett looked down at Briar. That explained the night beside the couch, the pressure of her muzzle against his knee. The way she had known his breathing was wrong before he had fully known it himself. "Try something," Dr. Price said. He raised one hand, palm down, then lowered it slowly. Briar sat. Not eagerly, not like a dog performing for a treat, more like an old bell remembering the shape of its own sound. Dr. Price made another signal, 2 fingers toward his own chest, then down beside his leg. Briar stepped close to Everett's left side and leaned lightly against him. Everett did not move. The pressure was controlled. Intentional. The same kind she had used in the dark. Dr. Price's face softened. "There she is." Everett swallowed. Briar looked up at him, waiting for something he did not know how to give. "Who taught you all this?" he said under his breath. Dr. Price tapped the useless chip information with one finger. "I'll make some calls. Old networks don't disappear completely. They just get cranky and harder to find." As they left the clinic, Briar paused at the sidewalk. Main Street was only 2 blocks away, and beyond it stood the public library, a brick building with white trim, tall windows, and 2 stone lions at the steps wearing ridiculous red scarves someone had knitted for the festival. Briar looked toward it. Then she took 1 step. Everett held the leash loosely. "Truck's this way." Briar did not pull hard. She only looked at him again, then toward the library. Everett followed her gaze. He told himself it meant nothing. Dogs noticed movement, smells, familiar routes. Maybe Nora had walked that way. Maybe Briar remembered the town. Maybe he was assigning meaning to a glance because tired men and rescued dogs were dangerous ingredients in the same story. Briar took another step toward the library. Everett sighed. "You get 1 vote," he said. "Apparently it counts more than mine." The Lake Elowen Public Library was warm in the old-fashioned way, radiators clicking beneath windows, wood floors creaking under boots, dust floating in shafts of winter light. Paper snowflakes hung above the front desk. A small display near the entrance advertised the upcoming Winter Light Festival, and beside it stood a cart of returned books waiting to be shelved. Nora Vance stood near the historical section with a stack of hardcovers pressed to her chest. She did not see them at first. Her hair was tied low at the nape of her neck, brown with a few silver threads near the temple. She wore a cream sweater beneath a long chestnut cardigan, and the sleeves were pulled over her wrists, though the library was warm. There was nothing dramatic in her posture. That made it harder to look away. She stood like a person who had learned to take up only the amount of space that would not be punished. Briar made a sound, not a bark, not a low, broken whine that seemed to rise from somewhere beneath the floorboards of her body. Nora turned. The book slipped slightly in her arms. For a moment, the whole library narrowed to the distance between the woman and the dog. Nora set the books down on the nearest table, slowly, carefully, as if speed might shatter something. "Briar," she whispered. Briar walked toward her, not rushing, not jumping, not forgetting herself. Nora lowered to her knees with the same caution, one hand extended, palm up. Briar placed her muzzle into that hand. Nora closed her eyes. Everett looked away. Some reunions were not meant to be watched too closely. They were holy in the way old trees were holy, not because they shone, but because they had endured weather without asking anyone to admire them. When he looked back, Nora's hand trembled against Briar's cheek. Briar leaned into her just once. Then Nora opened her eyes and saw Everett noticing the faint bruise at her wrist where the sleeve had slipped back. She covered it quickly. Too quickly. Heat rose through Everett's chest, not the clean heat of anger in combat. That had direction. This was rougher, older, more helpless. His mind began moving without permission. Clay, house, legal risk, evidence, witnesses, immediate intervention. He could drive there now. He could put the fear of God into Clay Vance without raising his voice. He knew how to stand in a doorway and become the last warning a man ever needed. Some part of him, dark and efficient, liked the simplicity of that. Nora saw it. Her face changed before he said a word. "Please don't," she said. Everett went still. "I didn't say anything." "No." Her hand rested lightly on Briar's head. "But you were about to become very useful in a very dangerous way." The sentence struck him harder than it should have. A woman at the front desk glanced over, then politely lowered her eyes to a stack of library cards. Everett kept his voice low. "Did he do that?" Nora looked at her wrist. Then she looked past him, toward the tall windows where snow slid down the glass. "I'm not asking you to handle my life, Mr. Harlan." "Everett." "All right, Everett." She took a breath. "I'm grateful for what you did for Briar, more grateful than I know how to say. But if you go to Clay angry, he won't become less dangerous. He'll just become quieter about it until there's no one around." The words were steady. Not fearless, better than fearless. They were afraid and true at the same time. Everett hated how much sense they made. He had spent years being paid to move toward danger, to close distance, to end the threat. But Nora was telling him that in her world, force could make the trap smaller. "Your papers?" he asked. She blinked. "Your ID bank information, deed, medical records, anything you need if you leave." For the first time, surprise replaced caution in her face. "My birth certificate is in his lockbox. Passport too. He says things get lost if I keep them." Her mouth tightened around the familiar lie. "My paycheck goes into a joint account. I have some cash at the library, but not much." Everett felt Briar shift against Nora's knee. The dog had gone very still, as if listening not to the words, but to the weight beneath them. Nora's fingers rested on the old leather collar. "I tried to take her to a rescue once," she said. "Last winter, Clay found the carrier in the shed. He said if I tried again, he'd drive her into the mountains and let the coyotes sort it out." Everett closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, the library was the same. Warm lights, wooden shelves, snow at the windows. A woman kneeling beside a dog she had saved the only way she could, by letting someone else take her away. "Who knows?" he asked. Nora's laugh was quiet and without humor. "In a town this small, more people than will admit it." The front door opened then, bringing in a gust of snow and the smell of cold wool. June Mallory entered, carrying a cardboard tray of coffees like a battlefield medic carrying blood plasma. Her red wine apron was hidden beneath a mustard-yellow coat, and a knitted hat sat crooked on her silver curls. She took in the scene, Nora on the floor, Briar pressed against her, Everett standing too straight, and her humor softened into something more careful. "Well," June said, "I brought coffee because librarians run on ink and caffeine, but it appears I've walked into the serious chapter." Nora wiped quickly beneath one eye. Everett pretended not to see that either. June set the tray on the table. "Nora, honey, Ruth is on duty until 5. I can call her." Nora stiffened. June lifted both hands slightly. Not to push, not to drag, just to talk. Everett looked at June. "Ruth?" "Deputy Ruth Calder," June said. "One of the few people in this county who understands that telling a woman to just leave is like telling a person on thin ice to just walk faster." Nora stared at the coffee cups. Briar slowly sat beside her, shoulder touching her leg. No command, no leash, just presence. Nora's hand moved from the collar to the top of Briar's head. "All right," she said. "Talk, only talk." June nodded once, as if a treaty had been signed. 20 minutes later, Deputy Ruth Calder arrived without lights, sirens, or the heavy-footed importance some officers wore like another badge. She came in through the side door of the library, knocking snow from black boots, her navy parka marked with a small sheriff's department patch. She was about 50, with dark hair cut at her jaw and threaded with silver. Her face had angles carved by weather and patience, and her eyes held the calm of a person who knew panic was contagious and refused to spread it. She did not ask Nora why she had stayed. That alone changed the air. Instead, Ruth sat across from her at a reading table near the back, took out a small black notebook and a silver pen, and said, "Let's talk about what you can safely control this week." Everett stood near the window with Briar at his side. He did not join them. That was harder than entering any room had ever been. He watched Ruth ask quiet questions. Where were Nora's documents? Did Clay have firearms? Had he made specific threats? Was there somewhere Nora could sleep if needed? Did she have access to medication, keys, cash, transportation? Each question was practical, plain, and strangely merciful. Mercy, Everett realized, sometimes looked like a checklist. June came to stand beside him. "You look like you're chewing nails," she said. "I don't like standing by." "No," June said. "Men like you usually prefer doors they can kick." He glanced at her. She shrugged. "Relax. I mean that affectionately." "That's supposed to make it better?" "Not really." Beyond the window, Main Street moved with festival preparation. A man in a brown canvas jacket stood outside the hardware store across the street, pretending to arrange a display of snow shovels while looking toward the library. June followed Everett's gaze. "Sam Whitaker," she said. "Owns the hardware place, lives 2 houses down from Clay and Nora." Sam was around 60, thin-shouldered, with a faded cap pulled low and a tape measure clipped to his belt. He had the face of a man who had learned to apologize to himself before anyone else could accuse him. His glasses fogged as he breathed into his scarf. He looked at the library door, then away, then back again. "He knows?" Everett asked. June's mouth tightened. "He hears. Different thing, apparently." Everett watched Sam pick up the same shovel twice. "He ever report anything?" "No." The answer sat between them, small and ugly. Inside the library, Ruth turned a page in her notebook. Nora spoke quietly. Her shoulders were still curved inward, but she had not pulled her sleeves over her hands again. Briar leaned against Everett's leg, not because he was falling apart this time, because he was learning to stay. Sam Whitaker crossed the street suddenly, moving with the awkward determination of a man walking into weather he deserved. He entered the library, removed his cap, and stood near the front desk for several seconds before approaching Ruth and Nora. Everett could not hear every word. He heard enough. "I seen the dog outside," Sam said, voice rough. "More than once. Nights it had no business being out. Heard things, too. Didn't want to get mixed up." He swallowed. That was cowardly. Nora did not look at him with forgiveness. She looked at him with exhaustion. Ruth turned her notebook toward him. "Would you be willing to make a statement?" Sam looked at Nora first, then at Briar. "Yes," he said. "I would." Everett looked down at the German shepherd beside him. Briar had not dragged him here to uncover a mystery. She had brought him to a room where silence was beginning, painfully, to change sides. By late afternoon, the snow outside had softened into silver dust. Ruth and Nora remained at the back table, building something that did not look heroic enough for stories, but mattered more than heroics. Copies to make, numbers to call, a spare key to hide, a room above the library that June knew could be warmed by nightfall. Everett stepped outside to give them privacy. The cold met him cleanly. He stood beneath the library awning, hands in his jacket pockets, his father's scratched diving watch pressing against his wrist. Through the glowing window, he could see Nora speaking with Ruth. June hovered nearby with coffee she insisted was not emotional support, though it clearly was. Sam sat apart, cap in his hands, looking smaller than he had across the street. Briar sat beside Everett in the falling snow. For once, she was not aiming her body toward an exit. She watched the library. Everett had spent half his life believing protection meant getting between danger and the person in its path. Tonight, protection looked different. It looked like staying outside while someone else chose her next step. It looked like not mistaking his strength for permission. Briar's shoulder touched his knee. Everett lowered his hand, stopping just above her head. This time, Briar lifted her muzzle into his palm. The gesture was small. In the old myths, heroes were given swords, shields, impossible tasks. Everett had been given a dog who asked him to learn restraint. He looked through the window at Nora, then down at Briar. "All right," he said softly. "We stand here." Snow gathered on his boots, on Briar's dark back, on the library steps. For the first time in many years, Everett did not move toward the fight. He held the line outside it. By sundown, Lake Elowen had dressed itself in gold. Every porch along Main Street wore a string of yellow bulbs. The old chapel bell tower glimmered with silver ribbons, and the 2 stone lions outside the library still sat under their red scarves, looking as if they had been appointed guardians of holiday nonsense and accepted the role with dignity. Snow fell in slow, harmless flakes, the kind that made people forgive winter for all its crimes. Everett Harlan had planned to avoid the festival. He had excellent reasons. His cabin needed firewood brought in. The truck needed its tire chains checked. Briar needed rest. His own tolerance for crowds had always been about as generous as a locked ammunition box. June Mallory destroyed every one of those reasons before noon. "You're coming," she had said over the phone, her voice sharp with cheer. "Briar needs to learn people aren't all thunderclouds, and you need to learn how to eat a waffle without looking like it's part of a military inspection." "I don't inspect waffles." "You stare at them with suspicion." "I do not." "You do. The syrup feels judged." So Everett came. He wore his olive-drab combat shirt beneath a heavy charcoal wool coat, the faded camouflage sleeves visible at the cuffs. A gray scarf sat awkwardly around his neck, placed there because June had shoved it into his hands at the diner and said even old warhorses could catch pneumonia. His boots moved carefully over the packed snow, and Briar walked beside him on a loose lead. She was not relaxed. Not yet. Her ears turned toward every sound: laughter by the cider booth, boots scraping over ice, the crackle of a portable speaker playing old Christmas songs near the church steps. Her yellow-black coat was clean now, brushed until the gold in her chest showed like candlelight under smoke. The small nick in her left ear caught snowflakes, and the old leather collar with the faded North Star mark sat looser around her neck. Everett did not ask her to heal. He had learned that some obedience came from trust, and trust, like good firewood, could not be rushed unless a man wanted smoke in his eyes. June spotted them from her booth before they reached the square. She stood behind trays of apple turnovers and paper cups of hot cider, wearing a red wine apron over a mustard coat and a knitted hat that leaned dangerously to one side. She waved a pair of tongs like a queen blessing troops. "There they are," she called, "the least festive man in Vermont and the prettiest girl at the party." Briar paused. June softened her voice immediately. "Not too much, sweetheart. I know. People are loud because silence makes them nervous." Everett accepted a cup of coffee from her. "I thought this was supposed to be cider?" "It is, for people with joy in their blood." June handed him black coffee anyway. "You're in remedial warmth." Across the square, the festival moved around them in bright circles. Elderly couples stood beneath strings of bulbs, sharing paper bowls of stew. A retired schoolteacher sold handmade ornaments from a folding table. Two men from the volunteer fire department argued cheerfully over how to hang lanterns along the pier without dropping either themselves or the lanterns onto the ice. There were no grand speeches, no marching band, no polished spectacle, only a town trying in its small, stubborn way to make light visible before the longest nights swallowed the hills. Everett found a place near the edge of the square where Briar could see open space behind her. He held the leash loosely and let her choose whether to sit or stand. At first she remained on her feet, body angled, eyes moving. A paper firework popped near the cider booth. Briar flinched, but she did not drop. Everett lowered his hand beside her shoulder without touching. A question, not a command. She looked up at him. Then, slowly, she sat. It should not have felt like a victory. It did. Near the chapel steps, a man in a Navy Fire Department jacket laughed too loudly, then stopped as the bell above them rang the hour. The sound rolled over the square, deep and bronze, beautiful to everyone except the gray-haired man, who suddenly went rigid beneath it. Everett noticed him because Briar did. The man's face lost color. His hands opened and closed at his sides. He tried to step backward, but his heel caught on packed snow, and for one dangerous second his body forgot how to belong to the present. Briar rose before Everett gave any signal. She did not pull hard. She simply moved with quiet purpose toward the man. "Briar," Everett said softly, more question than warning. She looked back once, then continued. The man's wife, a small woman in a blue parka, reached for his arm. "Glenn?" The man shook his head as if trying to clear a sound from inside it. "I'm fine." He was not fine. Briar stepped close to his left leg and sat against him, leaning her warm shoulder into his shin with steady pressure. Not crowding, not demanding, just there. The man looked down. His breathing hitched once. Briar leaned a little harder. Everett stopped several feet away, giving the moment room. The man's wife stared at the dog, then at Everett. "How did she—" "I don't know all of it yet," Everett said. That was the honest answer, but he knew enough. He knew the difference between a trick and a calling. Briar had not performed. She had answered a wound no one had spoken aloud. The old firefighter lowered one trembling hand until it rested above Briar's head. He did not quite touch her. "Had a roof come down on me in '89, he said, voice rough. "Bell sounded just like that when they pulled us out." His wife put a hand over her mouth. The town kept moving around them, but quietly now, as if even the festival lights had bowed their heads. Briar remained until Glenn's breathing steadied. Then she stood, gave one small shake of her coat, and returned to Everett as if nothing extraordinary had happened. June, watching from the cider booth, wiped the corner of one eye with the heel of her hand and immediately ruined the tenderness by saying, "Well, now I need to charge extra for cider. Emotional events are expensive." Everett almost laughed. Almost. But his eyes stayed on Briar. He had thought she was recovering from a purpose. Now he wondered if the purpose was recovering inside her too. A hush moved across the far side of the square. Everett turned. Nora Vance had arrived with Deputy Ruth Calder beside her and June's spare wool shawl around her shoulders. Nora wore a faded teal winter coat buttoned to her throat, gray gloves, and boots that looked carefully cleaned. Her brown hair was tied low, but a few strands had escaped beneath her hat. She moved like someone stepping onto a frozen lake she had been warned might crack. Ruth walked beside her in a dark parka, steady and unhurried, the kind of presence that did not announce protection but made it difficult for danger to find an opening. Briar saw Nora. The dog did not run. Instead, she gave a soft sound, low in her chest, and walked forward with a gentleness that made Everett's throat tighten. Nora crouched near the lantern table. Briar pressed her head against Nora's hip. No jumping, no frantic display. Just contact, a quiet declaration. "I remember." Nora's gloved hand rested on Briar's neck, fingers careful around the old collar. Her face changed, not into happiness exactly, into relief touched by grief, like a window opening in a room where the air had been stale for years. "Hello, girl," Nora whispered. "You look warmer." Briar leaned into her. Everett stood back. He was beginning to understand that love did not always ask to be witnessed. Sometimes it only needed enough space to breathe. June appeared with a cup of cider and pressed it into Nora's free hand. "Drink. You look like a snowflake with a library card." Nora gave the smallest laugh. It was fragile. It was real. For a while, the festival held. Everett watched Nora speak quietly with Ruth. June moved between booths, feeding half the town and scolding the other half. Sam Whitaker stood near the hardware store display, cap in his hands, not quite joining anyone, but not hiding either. When Nora looked his way, he nodded once. She did not smile, but she did not turn away. That, Everett thought, was its own beginning. Then the red pickup rolled slowly into the edge of the square. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The truck was old, rust along the wheel wells, one headlight slightly dimmer than the other. Everett recognized it before the door opened. So did Nora. Her fingers tightened around the cider cup until the lid buckled. Briar felt it. Her body shifted between Nora and the street. Clay Vance stepped out into the festival lights. He wore his brown work jacket open over a thermal shirt, boots unlaced at the top, a black knit cap pulled low. His face was flushed, but his walk was steady enough to tell Everett he was not beyond knowing what he was doing. That made it worse. A drunk man, lost in his own fog, was one kind of danger. A drunk man steering his anger was another. Conversation thinned around the square. Clay smiled as if everyone had gathered for his convenience. "Well, isn't this sweet?" he said. His eyes moved from Nora to Briar, then to Everett. "Town hero brought my dog to the party." Everett's hands remained at his sides. Ruth stepped slightly forward, not blocking Nora, not escalating, simply becoming visible. "Clay," she said, her voice even, "this is a public event. Keep it civil." Clay gave a short laugh. "I'm civil. I'm here for my property." Briar's ears went back. Nora stood slowly. "She isn't your property." Clay's gaze snapped to her, and for half a second the old pattern tried to return. Everett could see it, the invisible leash Clay expected to tighten around Nora's voice. The square seemed to hold its breath. Clay pointed toward Briar. "I sold her while I was drunk. That don't count. Man took advantage." Everett reached inside his coat, Ruth lifted one hand, stopping him before he could step forward. "Stay there," she said, not unkindly. Everett stopped. It was harder than it looked. Ruth turned to Clay. "You signed a bill of sale." "I was drinking." "That may become relevant if you want to explain why you were negotiating animal ownership while intoxicated," Ruth said. "But it doesn't automatically void the document." A few people shifted. Someone near the cider booth whispered. Clay's face darkened. He looked at the crowd, searching for the version of himself that had always worked on strangers. Wronged man, working man, man disrespected by outsiders. "You all think you know something," he said. "That dog was nothing but trouble. Now suddenly she's worth something because he's got her?" There it was. Not love, not regret, value. Everett felt anger rise, but it no longer had the steering wheel. Nora took one step forward. Her voice shook when she began. The shaking did not make it weak. "You left her outside in snow." Clay turned toward her. "Nora?" "No." The word was small, but it landed. The bell above the chapel gave a faint metallic sway in the wind, though it did not ring. Nora looked at Briar first, then at Ruth, then at the circle of neighbors who had become very still. "I fed her when I could. I brought warm water when I could. I tried to take her somewhere safe once, and you threatened to leave her in the mountains." She swallowed. "Everett did not take advantage of you. He gave you money for something you had already stopped treating like a living creature." Clay's jaw worked. "Nora, get in the truck." The old command crossed the square like a thrown stone. Nora flinched, but she did not move toward him. Briar pressed against her leg. Sam Whitaker stepped out from near the hardware display. His face had gone pale above his scarf. He held his cap with both hands, twisting the brim. "I saw the dog out," he said. Clay turned. "Stay out of this, Sam." Sam's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, cowardice and conscience wrestled across his face in plain view of the whole town. Then he took another step. "I saw her out at night, more than once. Cold nights. Heard you yelling, too." His voice roughened. "I should have said something before." Clay's eyes narrowed. "You spying on my house now?" "No," Sam said. "I was ignoring it. That's worse." The sentence changed the crowd. Not loudly. No one cheered. No one clapped. But people looked at one another differently, as if a spell had cracked. Silence, once Clay's ally, began moving away from him. Everett took the folded bill of sale from his coat and handed it to Ruth when she reached for it. Ruth read it by the glow of a lantern. "Clay Vance," she said, "you need to leave the festival. If you continue threatening Ms. Vance, Mr. Harlan, or attempting to remove the dog, I'll take further action tonight. Do you understand?" Clay stared at her, then at Everett. Everett said nothing. His stillness was no longer a threat. It was a boundary. Clay wanted a fight, a shove, a raised voice, something he could point to and call proof that he was the injured party. No one gave it to him. That left him standing alone in the light. He spat into the snow near his boot, turned, and walked back to the red pickup. The engine coughed alive. The truck rolled away from the square, taillights fading beyond the chapel road. Only after he was gone did Nora's shoulders drop. Not in triumph. In survival. June crossed the square and wrapped her own mustard yellow coat around Nora's shoulders, though Nora already wore one. "June," Nora whispered. "Don't argue," June said. "I'm very generous when I'm angry." That startled a quiet laugh from someone nearby, then another. The festival breathed again, but it was not the same breath as before. It had learned something about itself. The chapel bell rang the next hour. This time, Glenn, the old firefighter, stood steady, his wife's hand in his. Briar sat beside Nora, calm and watchful. Sam remained near the lantern table, eyes lowered, but he did not leave. Everett looked out over the frozen lake. Strings of light reflected on the ice in trembling gold lines, as if the town had lowered stars onto the surface and dared the cold to put them out. Nora stood beside him after a while, Briar between them. "I was afraid my voice wouldn't work," she said. Everett looked at her. "It worked." Nora watched the lights. Her face was pale, tired, and different now in a way that had nothing to do with being unafraid. Fear was still there, but it no longer had the whole room. "I thought everyone would hear him instead," she said. "They did," Everett answered. "Then they heard you." Briar leaned against Nora's leg, then shifted slightly, so her shoulder brushed Everett's boot too. The gesture was brief, almost accidental. Everett knew it was not. The bell's sound rolled across Lake Elowen, deep and bright, carrying over the ice, into the pines, up toward the dark hills. Once Everett had believed courage belonged to men running toward gunfire. That night, beneath winter lights and falling snow, he watched a woman speak with a trembling voice, a neighbor confess his silence, and a wounded dog stand calmly between past and future. And for the first time in a long while, Everett understood that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it rang like a bell over a frozen lake. Sometimes it said one word: no. Nora did not go back to Clay's house after the festival. That was the first fact, small and enormous, like the first stone laid for a bridge. By 10 that night, the room above the library had been unlocked, swept, and bullied into usefulness by June Mallory, who claimed she was only helping because dust and despair are both bad for the lungs. The room had once been used for storage, old event posters, broken reading lamps, boxes of donated paperbacks no one had the heart to throw away. Now it held a narrow iron bed, a wooden desk with one uneven leg, a radiator that clanked like a ghost with a spoon, and a window looking down over Main Street. To Nora, it looked like a palace, not because it was beautiful, because the door had a lock Clay did not own. Deputy Ruth Calder had handled the move with quiet efficiency. She brought Sam Whitaker, who drove his hardware store van with his jaw clenched and his cap pulled low, as if shame were weather he had to push through. June packed Nora's clothes into 2 laundry baskets and 1 old suitcase while muttering insults at Clay's housekeeping under her breath. Ruth documented everything: the condition of Briar's old chain, the frozen bowl beneath the maple, the marks on the doorframe where something had been slammed hard more than once. Everett stayed outside most of the time. That had been Nora's request. Not because she distrusted him, because she needed one place in this night where men did not decide the shape of her fear. So Everett stood by his truck beneath the streetlight, Briar beside him, watching snow gather on the hood. Every few minutes he looked toward Clay's dark windows and felt the old impulse rise in him. Enter, confront, finish. The feeling had clean edges. That was what made it dangerous. Briar leaned her shoulder against his leg. Everett looked down. "I know," he said. "I'm standing still." Briar's amber eyes remained on the house. Clay had been taken to the sheriff's office after the festival, not arrested in a grand way, not dragged off like the villain in a cheap story. Deputy Ruth had made it clear he needed to sober up, receive formal warnings, and understand that any further intimidation would be documented. Real life, Everett was learning, did not always offer the satisfaction of a clean ending. Sometimes justice began with paperwork under fluorescent lights. Near midnight, Nora stood in the doorway of the library room wearing the teal coat from the festival over her sweater. Her hair had come loose from its tie. She looked exhausted, but there was a strange steadiness in her face. June set a kettle on the little hot plate. "You call me if the radiator gives up, or if you give up. I can fix one of those with a wrench and the other with soup." Nora managed a smile. Sam placed a small toolbox beside the desk. "Window sticks," he said, not meeting her eyes. I'll come by tomorrow and fix it proper if you want." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you, Sam." He nodded once, and the gratitude seemed to hurt him. Everett waited at the bottom of the library stairs until Ruth came down. "She's safe here?" he asked. Ruth zipped her parka halfway. "Safer than she was?" "That's not the same thing." "No," Ruth said. "It isn't, but it's honest." Everett respected that more than comfort. The next few days were not dramatic. That made them harder to endure. Clay did not disappear into repentance or jail or some convenient distance. He circled the edges of Nora's new life like a bad smell in cold air. He called from blocked numbers, left messages that began as apologies and curdled into blame. Parked across from the library for 20 minutes one afternoon, engine running until Ruth arrived and wrote it down in her black notebook. Nora wrote it down too. Date, time, words used, witnesses, screenshots, voicemails saved. Ruth taught her how to build a record the way another person might teach someone to stack firewood, evenly, patiently, so it would hold when the storm came. Everett hated the waiting. He hated seeing Nora flinch when a red truck passed the window. Hated the way June joked too loudly to give Nora time to breathe. Hated the fact that a man could poison the air of a town without technically standing close enough to be grabbed by the collar. One afternoon, after Clay left a voicemail accusing Nora of turning everyone against him, Everett stood in the library's back room with his hands braced on the edge of a table. "I can talk to him," he said. Nora sat across from him, her small blue notebook open but untouched. Briar lay under the table, her muzzle resting near Nora's boot. "No," Nora said. Everett closed his eyes. "I said talk." "You mean warn." He opened his eyes. Nora did not look angry. That made it worse. She looked tired in the exact shape of truth. "I need you beside me," she said. "Not instead of me." The sentence landed quietly. Everett had heard louder things in his life that mattered less. Nora's fingers moved to her sleeve, then stopped before she could pull it over her wrist. She noticed the small victory and looked down, almost surprised by herself. "When you step in front of everything," she said, "even for good reasons, I disappear again." Briar lifted her head. Everett looked at the dog, then at Nora. For years he had believed protection meant becoming a wall. Now Nora was asking him to become a porch light, near enough to help, far enough to let someone find the door herself. "I'll try," he said. Nora nodded. "That matters." Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Dr. Leland Price. Everett stepped into the hallway to take the call. "I found someone," Dr. Price said without preamble. "About Briar's chip." Everett straightened. "Who?" "Marla Keene, former coordinator for North Star Response Dogs. Lives in New Hampshire now. She's coming tomorrow morning." The next day arrived under a thin fall of snow, gentle as sifted flour. Marla Keene came to Everett's cabin in a blue Subaru, older than good sense, carrying a canvas satchel and a folder tied with a faded green ribbon. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck and a long gray wool coat that made her look part schoolteacher, part winter pilgrim. Around her neck hung a small silver pendant shaped like a star. She did not rush toward Briar when Everett opened the door. That was the first reason he liked her. Marla stepped inside, removed her gloves, and lowered herself slowly into a crouch near the entryway. "Well," she whispered, voice trembling around the edges. "There you are." Briar stood beside Everett, uncertain. Marla did not hold out both hands, did not coo, did not claim. She simply turned her palm upward and waited. Briar sniffed the air. Her body changed before she moved. A looseness came into her shoulders. Her head tilted slightly, as if a buried song had started somewhere far away, and she was trying to remember the words. Then she took one step. Marla's eyes filled. "Hello, Briar Rose." Everett looked down sharply. That was her name? Marla nodded, keeping her gaze on the dog. In the program, yes. Most handlers shortened it to Briar. Elise called her Rosie when no one important was listening. At the name Elise, Briar's ears lifted. Not fully. Just enough. Marla saw it and pressed her lips together. She remembers. Dr. Price arrived a few minutes later, pretending he had come only to check Briar's paws, though he sat down with the seriousness of a man attending a reunion. June brought cinnamon rolls without being asked, because June believed every revelation required carbohydrates. Nora came too, after Ruth walked her over from the library, and Briar went to her briefly before returning to the center of the room, where all the threads of her life seemed to be gathering. Marla opened the folder. Inside were photographs, training notes, intake forms, and a laminated card with a younger Briar sitting beside a woman in a blue field jacket. The woman had kind eyes, dark curly hair pulled back, and one hand resting lightly on Briar's shoulder. Elise Warren, Marla said, Briar's first trainer. Nora touched the edge of the photograph as if it were something sacred. She looks happy, Nora said. She was, Marla replied. They both were. The room grew quieter. Marla explained slowly, not as a twist, but as the careful restoration of a name erased by accident and neglect. North Star Response Dogs had been a small nonprofit that trained dogs to support people after trauma. Veterans, survivors of violent homes, first responders, people whose bodies still heard alarms long after the danger had passed. Briar had shown unusual sensitivity from the start. She learned pressure response, room scanning, guided exit, interruption during panic, and how to anchor a person without overwhelming them. She wasn't bred for force, Marla said. She was trained for return. Everett frowned slightly. Return? To the room, to the breath, to the body, to now. Everett looked toward the couch where, nights earlier, Briar had brought him back without asking permission or praise. Marla turned one of the old photos over. On the back, in blue ink, someone had written, Briar Rose. Follows grief like a lantern. No one spoke for a while. Then Marla told the harder part. Elise had become ill. Cancer, quiet at first, then not quiet at all. When she died, North Star was already struggling. Funding dried up, staff scattered, dogs were placed temporarily with foster handlers, partner families, and regional contacts. Records moved from one office to another. Then a flood damaged the storage unit holding paper files. Some dogs were tracked, some were not. Briar went to a temporary foster in western New Hampshire, Marla said. After that, the trail broke. I have hated that for years. Nora's hand went to Briar's old collar. The leather had been cleaned but still bore marks from weather and neglect. Marla noticed the movement. May I see it? Nora looked at Everett. He nodded. Marla turned the collar gently in her hands, then found the worn backside near the buckle. There, almost hidden beneath scratches, was a small engraved North Star. Her thumb rested over it. That was ours, she whispered. Every dog had one. The little mark changed the collar. It was no longer only a sign of what Briar had endured. It was proof that once someone had expected her to be guided by stars. Everett felt something inside him loosen and ache at the same time. He had bought a half-frozen dog beneath a maple tree. Now he was looking at the remains of a life that had been loved, trained, trusted, lost, and still somehow had not gone dark. What happens now? He asked. Marla folded her hands over the collar. Legally, North Star no longer operates as it did. There's no active claim to remove her from your care, especially with the sale document and the neglect history Deputy Calder is collecting. She looked at Everett carefully. If you want to keep her, I can help formalize it. But I'll ask one thing. Everett waited. Don't make her useful before she's safe. Briar stood between him and Nora, listening to voices that shaped her fate. Marla's eyes were kind, but not soft enough to be ignored. "She has worked enough. If she spends the rest of her life sleeping by your stove and stealing turkey from June, that is not a waste. That is a retirement." June sniffed. "For the record, turkey has to fall before it can be stolen." Dr. Price muttered, "Convenient theology." A small laugh moved through the room, and for a moment the grief did not vanish, but it had somewhere warm to sit. That evening, after everyone left, Everett sat alone at his kitchen table with his laptop open. Briar lay near the stove, not on the blanket, beside it. Progress, Everett had learned, was often a stubborn animal. On the screen, a grid of faces looked back at him from a veteran support group in Burlington. Men and women in living rooms, garages, parked trucks, spare bedrooms. People who wore ordinary clothes over extraordinary weather. When it was Everett's turn to introduce himself, he almost closed the laptop. He could have said the polished version, former Navy, Vermont. Doing fine, just listening. Instead, his thumb found the edge of his father's old diving watch, and he rubbed the scratched rim once. "My name is Everett," he said. The group waited. He looked toward Briar. She had lifted her head, amber eyes steady. "I think," he continued, his voice rougher than he wanted, "I forgot how to live normal." No one rushed to rescue him from the sentence. That helped. Later, after the call ended, Everett shut the laptop and sat in the quiet. Outside, snow kept falling over the lake and the pines. Inside, the fire breathed low in the stove. Briar stood, circled once, and stepped onto the gray wool blanket. Everett did not move. She lowered herself slowly, first her chest, then her hips, then her head. For several seconds her ears remained lifted, listening to the old world. Then, at last, they softened. Her legs stretched out, her body uncurled. She slept with her paws loose and her back to the door. Everett sat in the chair nearby, holding the old leather collar in both hands. The small North Star on the back caught the firelight, faint but still visible. A mark from a life before the chain. A promise from someone who had once believed Briar would guide the lost home. Everett looked at the sleeping dog. For the first time since she had crossed his threshold, nothing in the room seemed to be waiting for harm. Outside, winter went on, building its white kingdom. Inside, something finally stopped trembling. The morning after the heavy snow, Lake Elowen shone like a silver shield, laid at the feet of the town. Sunlight poured across the ice in pale sheets. Every pine branch wore a white sleeve. Roof lines glittered. Smoke rose straight from chimneys before the wind remembered its duties. For once, winter seemed almost kind, as if the night had polished the world clean and forgotten to leave a warning. Everett Harlan did not trust beautiful ice. He stood near the shed behind his cabin, splitting kindling beside a stacked row of birch logs. His forest green jacket hung open over the olive-drab combat shirt he wore more often than he admitted. The faded camouflage sleeves were pushed to his forearms, and the cold bit at his wrists, welcome and sharp. Briar lay near the porch in a square of sunlight, her black saddle fur gleaming, her golden legs stretched in front of her. She had been doing that more lately, stretching, sleeping, letting the world pass without assigning herself to guard all of it. The gray wool blanket by the stove had become hers completely. At night, she sometimes slept with her back to the door. Everett had not told anyone how much that meant to him. Some victories were too quiet for witnesses. From town, far across the lake road, came the faint sounds of morning, a truck backing up near the diner, June's laugh carrying further than physics should allow, a snow shovel scraping wood. The library window above Main Street had been lit since dawn. Nora was there, Everett knew, cataloging returned books and probably refusing June's third invitation to just move into the diner and save everyone the suspense. Nora hadn't gone back. Each day, that fact became less like a miracle and more like a foundation. Briar lifted her head. Everett paused mid-swing. The dog's ears stood forward, not sharp with fear, but focused. Her body rose in one smooth motion. She looked toward the frozen lake, then toward the old access path that curved behind the abandoned boathouse near the northern cove. "What is it?" Everett asked. Briar took 3 steps into the snow. Then she barked, not loud enough to panic the woods, not the frantic bark of a frightened animal. A single, hard sound, shaped like instruction. Everett set the axe down. Briar barked again and started moving. He followed. The snow along the path was deep where the wind had drifted it. Briar moved quickly, not racing, but with the old precision that sometimes surfaced in her like moonlight under clouds. Everett lengthened his stride, boots punching through the crust. Ahead, the lake flashed between trees, white and brilliant. Then he heard it. A human voice, thin, ragged, nearly swallowed by distance. "Help!" Everett stopped for half a heartbeat. Briar did not. She broke from the trees toward the cove. Everett came after her and saw the old storage shed near the shore, its roof sagging, its door hanging crooked. Beyond it, near the place where a narrow strip of ice met the bank, a man lay half-sprawled on the frozen edge. Clay Vance. For one strange second, the world seemed to remove all sound. Clay's red pickup was parked badly near the shed, one door hanging open. A toolbox lay overturned in the snow, wrenches scattered like dull silver bones. Clay's upper body was on the ice, his coat dark with wet near the waist. One leg had broken through where the ice thinned around a hidden spring current, trapping him at the edge of a jagged black opening. His face was gray-white beneath the flush of drink and cold. He saw Everett, relief and humiliation twisted together in his expression. "Harlan!" he shouted, voice cracking. "Help me, damn it!" Everett did not move toward him immediately. Not because he was considering leaving him. That was the part that frightened him later. For one breath, the image of Clay beneath the maple tree returned. The old chain, the frozen bowl, Briar's silent amber eyes. Then Clay at the festival, ordering Nora into his truck as though her name were something he owned. The voicemails, the watching, the way Nora had carried fear like a second coat. Everett felt the dark, efficient part of himself wake and say nothing. Silence could be a terrible advisor. Briar stood several yards from the broken ice, body low, barking in steady intervals. She did not run to Clay. She did not wag her tail. She did not forget. But she kept her eyes on him, anchoring his attention the way she had anchored Everett in the night. Clay tried to shift, and the ice cracked beneath his elbows. "Don't move!" Everett barked. Clay froze. The command had come out sharp enough to cut. Everett pulled his phone from his pocket and called Deputy Ruth Calder. "North Cove," he said the moment she answered. "Clay's through thin ice near the old shed. One leg trapped. Hypothermia risk. Send rescue. Now." Ruth did not waste time. "Stay off the ice if you can. Keep him still. I'm dispatching the volunteer team." Everett ended the call and scanned the cove. There was a thick maple 30 feet up the bank. A coil of tow rope lay in the bed of Clay's truck, half buried under an oily tarp. Everett moved fast, grabbed it, checked the line, then tied one end around the maple with a bowline his hands remembered better than prayer. He looped the other end around his waist, then lowered himself belly first onto the snow-packed bank near the ice. Clay watched him with wild eyes. "Hurry!" "Listen to me," Everett said. "If you thrash, you widen the break. Keep your chest flat, spread your arms. Do not try to stand." "I can't feel my foot." "I know." "You don't know anything." Everett looked at him. Clay shut his mouth. That small obedience, born of terror rather than respect, was enough. Everett crawled forward until his weight spread low across the snow at the ice edge. He did not go farther than he had to. The cracked area was bad, thin shelf ice over moving water. Beautiful from a porch, treacherous under a boot. Briar barked again. Clay flinched at the sound and turned his head toward her. The dog stayed where she was, safe on the bank, snow bright around her paws. She barked once more, then gave a low, rough whine. Clay stared at her. Something in his face shifted. Not redemption. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Recognition, perhaps. The creature he had treated like a thing was working to keep him conscious. "Briar," he said, teeth chattering. The dog did not come closer. Everett reached him with the loose end of the rope. "Get this under your arms." Clay's hands shook too hard. Everett inched closer, the ice groaning beneath the pressure. He could hear water moving below, black and patient. He caught the front of Clay's jacket and shoved the rope toward him. "Under your arms," he repeated. "Now." Clay managed it badly. Everett corrected the loop without touching him more than necessary. Sirens sounded faintly from town. Clay heard them too. His face crumpled with something that looked almost like anger at being seen. "They'll all know," he muttered. Everett stared at him. "You are half in a frozen lake, and that's what you're worried about?" Clay gave a broken laugh that turned into a cough. "You wouldn't understand." "No," Everett said. "I understand shame just fine. I also understand it doesn't make you special." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Clay's eyes flicked toward him, then away. For a minute, the only sounds were Briar's steady barks, the far rush of approaching vehicles, and the quiet crackle of ice deciding what kind of story it wanted to be. Everett braced his boots against the snowbank and held the rope. "If the ice shifts, I pull. You kick with the free leg only." "Not the trapped one." Clay nodded once, jaw trembling. The ice cracked. Not much. "Enough." Clay sucked in a breath, panic surging through his body. "Look at the dog," Everett snapped. "What?" "Look at Briar." Clay turned his head. Briar lowered herself into the snow, chest down, eyes fixed on him. She barked once, waited, barked again. A rhythm, a line thrown across terror. Clay's breathing, wild and shallow, tried to follow it. The first rescue truck arrived in a spray of snow. Deputy Ruth jumped out before it fully stopped, followed by 3 volunteer firefighters in cold water gear. Glenn was not among them. His younger nephew, a broad red-haired man named Aaron Pike, took lead with the brisk focus of someone trained for exactly this ugly little miracle. Ruth came to Everett's side. "You tied off?" "Yes." "Good. Let them work." Everett did not argue. That, too, was becoming a new kind of discipline. Aaron and the team moved fast. Rescue sled, secondary lines, ice poles, calm voices. No drama, no thunder, no music swelling over the lake. Just practiced hands and the grim kindness of people who had chosen to answer calls in winter. They secured Clay and began working his trapped leg free. Clay cried out once, more from fear than injury, and then clamped his mouth shut as if the sound had betrayed him. Briar stood but did not move forward. Everett noticed Ruth watching the dog. "She heard him first," he said. Ruth nodded. Of course she did. It took 12 minutes to pull Clay fully onto the sled. It felt longer. When they dragged him up the bank, he was shaking violently, his wet pant legs stiffening in the cold. His face had gone slack with shock. Aaron wrapped him in a thermal blanket, while another volunteer checked his pulse and spoke to him with firm, ordinary kindness. Nora arrived in Ruth's cruiser. Everett turned as the vehicle stopped near the road. Ruth must have called her once the rescue was underway, not before. Nora stepped out slowly, wearing her gray coat and white scarf, her face pale but composed. June emerged from the passenger side, holding a thermos and looking ready to scold death itself for poor manners. Ruth walked to Nora first. "You don't have to get close," she said. "You don't have to say anything. I wanted you to know before the town grapevine started singing opera." Nora nodded. Her eyes moved to Clay on the sled. He saw her. For once, no command came out of him. No, "Come here," no, "Get in the truck," no accusation dressed as injury. Only a shivering man wrapped in foil, smaller than the shadow he had cast. "Nora?" he said. She remained beside Ruth. Briar stood at Everett's leg, watching Clay. Clay's gaze moved to the dog. His lips trembled from cold. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out cracked, ugly, inadequate. Briar did not go to him. She did not growl either. She simply stayed beside Everett, her body aligned with Nora's distance, honoring a boundary no one had taught her in words. Clay looked from the dog to Nora. "I'm sorry," he said again, but this time the apology seemed to collapse under the weight of all it could not repair. Nora's face did not harden. That would have been easier. Instead, sorrow passed through it like a cloud crossing winter sun. "You need to be responsible for what you did," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the whole cove seemed to make room for it. "And I need to live." Clay closed his eyes. No one applauded. No one declared healing. The volunteer team lifted him into the ambulance. Ruth spoke with Aaron, then with another deputy who had arrived to secure the scene. There would be medical treatment first, then consequences. Violations documented, threats recorded, animal neglect added to the file. Clay's fall through the ice did not wash anything clean. Sam Whitaker came in his hardware van just as the ambulance doors closed. He stepped out with a folder in his hand and snow on his cap. He looked at Nora first, then at Ruth. "I brought the statement," he said. "Signed. Dates as best I remember." Ruth accepted it. Sam swallowed. "Should have done it sooner." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "It was not cruel. It was not forgiveness. It was truth." Sam nodded as if that was more than he deserved. After the vehicles left, the cove became quiet again. Only the broken place in the ice remained, dark water showing through the silver surface like an eye that had opened. June took Nora back to town. Ruth followed to finish the next steps. Sam drove away slowly, his van tires crunching over the snow. Everett stayed. Briar stayed with him. He sat on a fallen log near the shore, elbows on his knees, looking at the fractured ice. The rescue rope lay coiled beside him, wet and stiffening. His gloves smelled of lake water and old hemp. Briar stood near his boots. Everett did not touch her at first. "I wanted to hate him enough," he said quietly. The dog's ears moved. "I thought maybe if I hated him cleanly, it would make things simpler." The lake gave a soft groan. Everett looked down at his hands. They were steady now. "That's the trap, isn't it?" he said. "Thinking another man's cruelty gives you permission to become whatever answers it." Briar lowered her head and placed her muzzle on the toe of his boot. It was not absolution. Dogs, Everett was learning, were too honest for that. It was presence. He rested one hand lightly between her ears. "Saving someone from dying," he said, "doesn't mean handing them the right to hurt people again?" Briar closed her eyes. Across the lake, sunlight moved over the cracks, turning the broken ice bright enough to hurt. Beautiful and dangerous, like pride, like shame, like all the wounded things that did not know yet how to become harmless. Everett sat with Briar until the cold finally reached through his coat. Then he stood, gathered the rope, and turned back toward the cabin. Behind them, the lake kept shining, as if nothing had happened. But Everett knew better. Some fractures did not ruin the surface. They revealed what had always been moving underneath. Winter did not end all at once in Lake Elowen. It loosened its grip slowly, like an old hand unclenching around a stone. The mornings were still white. Frost still feathered the window panes. The lake still held its armor of ice beneath the pale sun. But something in the town had shifted. It was not the kind of change that announced itself with banners or speeches. It appeared in smaller things. A porch light left on for someone walking home late. A shovel clearing the library steps before Nora arrived. A second cup placed on a diner table without anyone asking. Nora Vance stayed in the room above the library. At first, she called it temporary. Then she stopped explaining. The room remained plain: iron bed, old desk, radiator with a talent for dramatic clanking. But Nora made it hers by degrees. A blue quilt appeared on the bed. A jar of pencils stood beside the window. A small brass reading lamp glowed on the desk each evening, bright enough to be seen from Main Street like a private star. She worked full-time at the library now. Deputy Ruth Calder helped her with the legal pieces: protective filings, statements, records, arrangements that moved with the unglamorous patience of law. Clay was no longer allowed near her or the library. He had gone into treatment after the lake incident, though nobody in town pretended treatment was the same thing as transformation. Nora did not speak of him often. When she did, she used his name without shrinking. That was progress, too. In the afternoons, she began hosting quiet reading hours for people who did not quite know where else to be. Retired teachers came. Widowers came. A former postal worker with shaking hands came and pretended he only liked the coffee. A few veterans from nearby towns sat in the back, not always reading, sometimes only resting in a room where no one asked them to explain their silence. Briar came on some days, not every day. Everett insisted on that, and for once he did not need Marla Keene or Dr. Price to correct him first. Briar's life was no longer something to spend on other people's wounds until nothing remained of her own. On the days she came, she wore no vest, no badge, no word that turned her into a symbol. She simply lay near the radiator or beneath Nora's desk, her yellow-black coat catching the library light. If someone's breathing changed, she sometimes lifted her head. If someone's hand trembled badly, she sometimes moved close and pressed her shoulder against a knee. And some days she did nothing at all. Those were Everett's favorite days, because on those days, Briar slept. Dr. Leland Price confirmed what everyone could see. Her weight was coming back. Her paws had healed. The raw skin beneath her collar had softened beneath new fur. The pale ring around her neck remained, a ghost of iron and winter, but it no longer looked like the first thing about her. "She'll always carry some of it," Dr. Price said one afternoon, examining her at the cabin, while June fed her turkey in open violation of every dietary warning ever issued. "But carrying is not the same as being crushed." June looked offended. "That turkey fell." "It climbed out of your hand?" "Gravity is mysterious." Everett had laughed then, a real laugh, brief and rusty, but unmistakable. June stared at him as if the chimney had begun singing opera. "Well," she said, "mark the calendar. The mountain made a sound." Everett's changes were quieter. He opened the curtains in the morning before making coffee. He bought 2 extra mugs from Sam Whitaker's hardware store, pretending it was because the old ones were chipped. Sam did not argue. He only wrapped them in newspaper and said, "Company happens when you own enough chairs." So Everett bought 2 used chairs, too. Then he repaired the porch railing, not because it was weak, but because Nora had once paused there with her hand on it and said she liked looking at the lake from that angle. He started cooking stew that did not come from a can. He attended the Burlington Veterans Support Group every Thursday night, sometimes speaking, sometimes listening, sometimes simply staying until the meeting ended. On one call, a woman with cropped gray hair said, "Normal isn't a place you go back to. It's something you build with what followed you home." Everett wrote that down on the back of an old receipt. He taped it inside the cupboard where he kept coffee. Briar found his new routines acceptable, except for the stew. She believed the carrots were unnecessary and showed this by removing one from her bowl and placing it on Everett's boot with profound disappointment. "You're a critic now?" he asked. Briar looked away, which was answer enough. Nora visited the cabin sometimes, always by invitation, never as an escape route. She and Everett walked with Briar along the lake road in the late afternoons. They talked about books, generators, weather, old songs, bad coffee, good soup, and the ridiculous scarves on the library lions. They did not talk about love, not because it was absent, because neither of them wanted to use a word as a bandage. Nora was still learning the shape of her own life. Everett respected that in the only way that mattered. He did not hurry to make himself its answer. If their shoulders brushed while walking, they let the moment pass without grabbing it. If she laughed at something he said, he stored the sound quietly, not as a claim, but as a gift. Once, June caught them having coffee together at the diner and leaned over the counter. "I'm not saying anything," she said. Everett raised an eyebrow. "You just did." "I said I'm not saying the thing I could say. That's restraint. You're welcome." Nora laughed into her cup. Briar, beneath the table, accepted a piece of bacon from June's apparently lawless hand. By late February, Marla Keene returned to Lake Elowen with a folder of papers, a new collar, and a small wooden box tucked under one arm. Everett had made the box himself from maple, though he did not mention how many times he sanded the lid until it felt right. The wood came from a fallen branch near the old tree where he had found Briar. Not the trunk, not a wound cut from the place, only a branch the winter had already given up. Marla turned the box in her hands when he showed it to her. "You made this for the old collar?" Everett nodded. "It deserves somewhere better than a drawer." Marla looked at him, and her smile had both sorrow and approval in it. "So do many things." The town gathered that evening by the old maple. Not the whole town. Lake Elowen was too modest for that. But enough came. June with thermoses of cider, Dr. Price with a scarf that looked older than medical school, Ruth in her navy parka, Sam Whitaker carrying a lantern post he had built himself, Glenn the retired firefighter and his wife, several library regulars, a few veterans who stood near the back without needing to be named. Snow fell gently, not covering the world this time, only blessing it. Sam set the small lantern post beside the maple tree. It was simple. Dark metal, glass panels, a warm bulb inside. He had wired it to run from a buried line connected to the house next door, with permission arranged through Ruth and enough paperwork to keep him muttering for 3 days. When he finished, he stood back with his cap in both hands. Nora looked at the lantern, then at Sam. He did not ask for forgiveness. That mattered. "I should have put light here sooner," he said. Nora's gaze moved to the tree, to the place where the chain had scarred the snow weeks before. "Yes," she said. Sam nodded, eyes wet. Then Nora added, "But you put it here now." The words did not erase the past. They did something more honest. They gave the present a task. June cleared her throat loudly, because tenderness made her suspicious unless she was the one distributing it. "All right, before we all freeze into moral statues, let's do the thing." Briar stood beside Everett, wearing her old brown leather collar for the last time. The worn band had been cleaned and softened, but no care could make it young again. On the back, near the buckle, the faded North Star still caught the lantern light. Nora knelt in front of Briar and rested both hands lightly against the dog's neck. Briar did not stiffen. That was a miracle no one applauded. Nora unbuckled the collar slowly. The leather came free. For a moment, Briar's neck was bare. The pale ring in her fur showed clearly beneath the falling snow. Nora's fingers trembled, but her voice did not. "This held too many lives," she said. "The one that loved you, the one that lost you, the one that hurt you, the one that found you." She placed the old collar into the maple box. Everett closed the lid. Marla stepped forward with the new collar. Deep blue leather, soft but strong, a small silver North Star charm beside the buckle. On the inside, where the words would rest against Briar rather than announce themselves to the world, a line had been engraved. Home is a promise kept. Marla held it out to Everett first. He shook his head gently. Nora should. Nora looked at him. Everett's expression gave nothing away except the truth he had learned the hard way. Some honors did not belong to the strongest person in the room. Nora took the collar. Briar lowered her head to make it easier. The gesture broke something open in Nora's face. Not pain exactly, not even joy. Trust recognized trust. She fastened the collar, then rested her forehead briefly against Briar's. Around them, the lanterns along the road glowed gold. The lake reflected every light in long, trembling lines. Above, the sky had cleared enough for a few stars to show through torn clouds, small and cold and faithful. Everett felt Briar lean back until her flank touched his leg. Nora stood beside him. No one spoke for a while. The town, usually uneasy around silence, allowed this one to live. Everett looked at the old maple. He remembered the first night, the chain, the frozen bowl, the woman's hand against glass. The dog who did not believe freedom had truly arrived. He had thought he brought Briar home. But that was too simple, and the truth had never been simple. Briar had brought him back to rooms he had abandoned inside himself. Nora had shown him that protection without respect could become another kind of cage. June, Ruth, Doctor. Price, Marla, Sam, all of them, stubborn and imperfect, had reminded him that a person did not heal by becoming invulnerable. A person healed by becoming reachable. June began handing out cider. Glenn complained the cups were too small. Dr. Price accused June of feeding Briar again. Ruth pretended not to see it. Sam adjusted the lantern twice, though it was already straight. Life, Everett thought, did not return like a trumpet. It came back like that. Cups in cold hands. A dog shaking snow from her coat. A woman standing beside a tree that no longer owned her fear. A town learning, late but not too late, that silence could be repaired only by use. When the gathering thinned, Everett, Nora, and Briar walked toward the lake. The snow underfoot shone faintly beneath the lanterns. Briar moved between them, neither leading nor following, simply belonging to the path. At the edge of the frozen water, they stopped. Nora looked out across the ice. "I don't know what happens next," she said. Everett kept his eyes on the lights reflected below. "No one does. That used to terrify me. And now?" she considered. "Now it just feels honest." Briar sat in the snow and leaned against both of them at once, solving the problem of distance in the way only a dog could, practically, without philosophy. Everett's mouth curved. Nora saw it. Was that a smile? No. It was close. Wind shifted my face. She laughed, and this time the sound did not seem fragile. It seemed like something with roots. They began walking again along the lake road, the town behind them glowing through the snowfall. No one was fully healed. No one had forgotten. The old collar rested in its maple box beneath the lantern at the tree, and the mark around Briar's neck would take time to fade, if it ever did. But they were not walking away from the past as if it had never happened. They were carrying it differently. In the myths Everett had grown up hearing, heroes ended storms by defeating monsters. But Lake Elowen knew a smaller, truer magic. The storm did not vanish. The people learned to keep lamps lit inside it. And beneath the soft winter sky, a former soldier, a woman finding her own voice, and a German shepherd with a blue collar walked together beside the frozen lake, not rescued, not completed, but alive enough to keep going. That was the miracle, not thunder, not victory. Warmth chosen again and again. In the end, Briar was not saved by one grand heroic act, and Everett was not healed in a single shining moment. Their miracle came slowly, through a door left open, a voice finally heard, a town willing to light one dark corner and the courage to choose kindness without surrendering truth. Maybe that is where grace often meets us too, not in thunder, but in small lamps kept burning when the winter feels long. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which moment stayed with you most. And if you believe stories of loyalty, healing, and second chances still matter, please subscribe and join us for the next one. May your home be warm, your heart be steady, and may God place a quiet light beside you when the road feels cold.